evening, everyone.
Could there really be any better engagement for an author to have this kind of attention paid to one's work? I'm not really sure that there is. I mean, reviewers, readers, but this is really something special, and so I'm really happy about this, and so thank you so much. The book, as Jerry was talking about, is a collection, and it's a collection of work that is hybrid prose, which includes prose poetry, very short stories, microfiction, flash fiction, this kind of thing. And I did have the pleasure of seeing what is going to be selected for tonight. And I'm so impressed with this because in reality, some of these works could be very challenging. It's much easier, I think, to go with a novel or something that has a much more traditional linear narrative, or a more traditional narrative, I would just say. And the selections did not shy away from going into some really more alternative, I guess I'll just say more alternative than traditional narratives. So I'm very excited about this. I think there couldn't be anything better than really having this opportunity for me to re-engage in my own work. So it feels really spectacular to me. I remember years ago going to see Michael Ondaatje, and his paperback had just been released, and he said, well, now I feel like maybe I could start talking about what this book is about, but I don't really think anybody should ask until at least the paperback is out. And, it's kind of like that in a way. You think you know certain things about what you're writing, and I know there are many writers here in the audience, so I think you know what I'm talking about. But in some ways, it's not really until you get feedback from your readers or people who are really engaged with your work that you start to understand more about it than you ever knew. And that's what I'm very excited about tonight. The book is a collection of work, as I've said, that has been written over a number of years. So there's that. And I guess the other thing I would say about it, it's always a very common question: is it autobiographical? Everyone wants to know, is this autobiographical? And I would say no, it is not. But like with anyone, of course, with any writer, you are in the book. You've written it, so it's your filter, it's your perspective, or whatever. And I guess I'll give a concrete example. As I said, I did get to see the list of what's going to be presented tonight. And so a concrete example would be the piece Celestial Bodies. And in that story, what I, as the author, share with the narrator is I do have an older brother, and he was kind of a Romeo, and maybe he still is. He's possibly still a Romeo, but that's kind of where the similarity ends. Yet it's probably in the emotional tone and the sort of unconscious that we all, as writers, and as I find myself in that piece, if that makes a certain kind of sense. So anyhow, I think there's not much more that I want to say about it. I'm just really eager to experienced this firsthand, and I can't wait to see what Martha is going to show us all and me about this. So thank you so much.
How's that? I have really enjoyed living with this piece for the last month or so. So it is selections from Peg Pursell's Show Her a Flower, a Bird, a Shadow. She wanted to be the girl who came into the restaurant where her family waited to celebrate her, and when she entered, they each would say congratulations, and many would mean it, at least one. At the flower. An answer eliminates all possibilities but one. Just as in marriage, he didn't believe in stopping, resting, or pausing. Drive was everything. Look at the fat bumblebee busy on the flower stalk, the creature anything but in repose, gathering nectar for all it's worth before moving on to the next. That was how to be in the world. He hadn't made himself up. He was the animal of some other's making. His was simply to follow his nature. Excuse me. Dear Miss, you were the subject of discussions in our household. You of the inky black hair, dyed, that curled under in a uniform roll, the dark-framed glasses that made you look grimmer and more removed than surely you were. You weren't the hardest, by which I mean the most unpleasant and unforgiving of teachers. You seemed to possess some softness, or at least a willingness to bend a little. Warmth? No. You'd also been my mother's teacher, and because of that, my parents were convinced you didn't care for me. The implication, my mother wasn't likable. I was supposed to take that as fact, unquestioningly, and I did. I carried with me the knowledge that I was an inferior student of an inferior people. It didn't matter that I was smart, my grades high. My inferiority was as much a part of me as were my 2 feet that carried me up the snowy sidewalks to the schoolyard, where I stood waiting for the bell to ring, my breath freezing in tiny clouds. As much a part of me as my hands, meant for keeping to myself, folded on my desktop when not gripping the yellow pencil correctly, to form words I copied from the board onto my tablet, my back end seated properly in my chair to serve as the foundation for good, strong posture, eyes directed straight ahead. At home, I received other lessons. You would not want to know. But you did know, didn't you? You knew without knowing the details. The head drooped over the book, the way a kid can't look you in the eyes. The tiny, jagged white scars that marked her forearms. You knew my inferior mother and her mother before her. Sincerely, a former student. Celestial bodies. As if in a game, my brother Derek crawls across the plank he stretched from rooftop to rooftop. 12 stories down. How many feet equal 1 story? This is not the kind of math problem my teachers prepared me for. And why? Why does he edge his body across the board, far enough out now that there is only the clotted shape of him like a hazy planet pasted on the night? For Carlotta, a girl. One day I will understand the power of that, he tells me, of being a girl, I suppose he means. But I'm a girl who can't imagine a boy risking anything for me. I can't understand why I would want a boy to dare death for me. What would I think of such a boy? I imagine Carlotta over on her rooftop, a cigarette trailing from her hand as she lounges cool. I glimpsed her one cloudy Saturday, eyes hidden behind her sunglasses, smiling at Derek, adjusting the straps of her top. That body, Derek had said. He must be getting near. there is no sound of his progress anymore. Only the traffic below, a sound I've imagined to be like the endless movement of the ocean. But at this moment, in this concentrated state of listening, I hear individual cars, stereo bass thumping, the diesel engine of a truck. Picture the truck, picture the driver, the stupendous serendipity, the body crashing through, a heaven of shattering glass refracting light like glitter. Imagine no body ever knows what hit it. An arrangement. Each day, on the way home from school, she walked by a dark and deteriorating building. The faded letters on the weathered sign hanging over the door that looked as if it might fall and maim an innocent passerby someday said Jake's Tavern, if one put a little imagination into the reading. Men smelling of whiskey, old sweat, and dead fish idled inside while she moved from class to class, science, math, social studies. Always drawn to what she didn't know, she longed to enter the tavern just to see. "You're never satisfied," her mother often said. She wished for a mother who would patiently plait her long hair into a braid, asking what she wanted to be when she grew up. But her mother insisted that her hair be kept short, manageable. It never seemed to occur to her mother that one day she would be old enough to leave home and would have to do something. When the time came and she moved out, she meandered from one job to another, one school to another, one man to another. No different from any girl who hadn't been worth the time spent to comb her pretty hair. Hair changes over time, thins, loses color. An aging woman, she returned to the town to visit her ancient mother in her sickbed. Regret edged into the lines that crossed the woman's face, while she sat and held the dry hand until the woman fell asleep. She took a walk uptown, discovered that the tavern had been torn down. In its place stood a florist's shop, vases of gaudy blooms crowding the window front. There was nothing for it but to buy an arrangement, to feel something goodly and important when her mother opened her eyes to the bright blossoms and smiled. A worn sock. A hole had opened in Josie's sock under the pad of her foot, not too far from her pinky toe. It didn't bother her. She wasn't like her husband, Carl, who, as a boy, couldn't bear if the seams of his socks didn't lay in a clean horizontal line across the top of his foot, or if extra material bunched up over his heels once he'd stepped into his Oxfords. Carl had planned to do something about the inexact sock measurements, how inexact sock measurements were when he grew up, his mother once confided to Josie. The two of them had been sitting outside the coffee shop having afternoon tea, a term Carl's mother used metaphorically, as she herself was on her second glass of Chardonnay at 3 p.m. Her eyes were moist with merriment. "Oh, Carl, her firstborn, such a pistol!" The memory of this tete-a-tete came to Josie as she pushed her foot with the worn sock and its hole into her hiking boot. 7 months of marriage, and Carl was more of an enigma than ever. Where was he now? He might be at a studio downtown where he constructed odd, elaborate sculptures using precisely folded paper he dared anyone to label origami. A night person, Carl often left their bed after she'd gone to sleep. She imagined him driving through the drowsing neighborhood, a sliver of moon witness when he let himself into the warehouse on Canal Street. It was dangerous to go there alone, but he only widened his eyes at her when she said that and told her that it turned him on when she made proclamations. Josie laced her boot and sat quietly on the edge of the bed. Outside the window, a squirrel jumped to a higher branch and scolded a creature she couldn't see. She could wait for Carl to show, which would be a mistake. It would be tomorrow when she heard from him, or she could head out to the trail alone on this perfect Sunday. She stood, her knees unhinging stiffly. She ignored the movement in the mirror across the room, her reflection that she knew would disappoint her, and crossed the room and began to feel the hole, the tacky spot where the flesh of her foot made contact with the inside of her boot, made itself increasingly known as she went out the door. The sensation would either worsen as she went, or she would grow numb to it. She didn't want to stop to change. The girl in the picture. In the photo, my daughter poses, smiling, dark hair sleek as the coat of a young filly. On the chipped cement steps, the tips of the black leather boots she loved peek from under a lacy hem. Beside the stairs, dirt redder than rust. One of the last years we lived together, she was 16. She couldn't wait to leave the South. This is what familiarity demands, that I examine every detail again as if new clues will present themselves. In our apartment, she liked to lie on the rug in my room to talk after school. I lay on the bed and listened. We all mock the silly, the stupid, the garish, she said. But why? She stared into my face like she saw something new there to examine. Sometimes I might have an answer for her piquant questions. Sometimes she would respond, "Old woman, surely you jest." We would never be alone again in that way. She was always looking deep into my face. When she was 4, just before I left her father, she said, if he didn't mean it, he should say he's sorry. I knew he would never apologize, and an apology would never alter the course we were following. The rest of her life, he would have a way of loving her before walking out again and vanishing for years. When she was 7 and we played a card game of war, she said, "Why does the king always win over the queen? Who made up the rules?" At 14, she was always giving her stuff away, like the expensive leather jacket I could barely afford that she gifted a runaway boy. "So many people seem concerned with the wrong things," she said. Once, not long before the picture was taken, she said she was sorry that she wanted so much. We were in the gourmet market where she'd loaded our cart with mangoes, a coconut, chocolate macaroons. I hope I said the right thing. In the photo, a wing of her hair lifts in the breeze and casts a shadow over the side of her face. The next moment after the shutter clicked, her hair would have dropped back into place. There must be something yet for me to discover by looking. Though it's cold this time of year in Midville, I sit on the balcony waiting until the sun clears the tops of the tallest pines. I never wanted to live here either. Girl in the picture, you certainly didn't make it easy on me. She would say, was I supposed to? U plus 2204. Katrina found a brown fedora laying in the aisle of the market, which she'd entered to escape the rain. She cruised around the store pretending to look at items on the shelves, miniature boxes of cereal, paper plates, packages of gummy candies, waiting to see if anyone would claim the hat. The store emptied of its last 2 customers. The fedora was meant for her, wasn't it? And she purchased an overpriced box of colored chalk with her last $3. Outside, she pulled the hat low over her brow. Within a few blocks, her sweater was soaked, her black tights clung to her thighs, and her sneakers were drenched, and she was shivering. But her face was dry. Up ahead, the bus shelter. A sort of glow emanated from it, haloing the people inside who huddled into themselves like separate islands. No one made eye contact as she approached. At the last minute, She made her decision and turned into the shelter. She took a seat on the bench in the corner. Next to her, hood pulled over his head so that she could see only the tip of his pointed nose, a guy hunched over a deck of cards he shuffled in his hands. Katrina watched from the corner of her eye. He did something elaborate with the deck. He was a casino dealer or an aspiring magician. He began to rock on the bench while he slid the cards back and forth between his hands. Soon, Katrina realized that this wasn't a normal deck. Instead of hearts and clubs, and spades and diamonds, the cards depicted unusual characters. Mathematical, perhaps. She'd taken a logics course once and thought she recognized a symbol. The guy paused, his hands moving to conceal the cards. "Where'd you get that hat?" he asked. "I lost one just like it." "My uncle gave it to me for my birthday, just before he shipped off to Afghanistan, where he died within the month," she said. "Uncle Roger," he said. Katrina said, "Yeah." "He sent me those cards from over there. His best deck," the guy said. "A generous man." Katrina agreed. So giving. The bus pulled up and hissed, and the others boarded, and Katrina and the guy watched the bus pull away, a wall of water splashing high but stopping short of reaching them in the shelter. Thank you.